What if I told you that Spain's DNA holds the key to understanding thousands of years of human migration, cultural exchange, and adaptation? From ancient hunter-gatherers to steppe warriors, from Celtic tribes to North African settlers, Spain's genetic code is like a time capsule, preserving the story of an entire continent. But here's the twist. Despite its rich history of invasions and conquests, Spanish DNA remains surprisingly unique. What makes it so special? Why is it so different from its Mediterranean neighbors? Today, we're diving deep into the fascinating genetic puzzle of Spain to uncover the secrets hidden in its people's DNA. Spain has always been at the crossroads of continents, where Europe meets Africa, and the Atlantic blends into the Mediterranean. This unique geography has shaped not just its culture and history but also its people's DNA. Over thousands of years, Spain has seen waves of migrations, from early hunter-gatherers to Neolithic farmers and steppe nomads. Later, it became a melting pot of influences during the Roman Empire, the Islamic period, and the Reconquista. But here's the intriguing part. Despite being a land of such diverse movements, genetic studies reveal a surprising homogeneity among Spaniards, with a strong connection to Western Europe. Even the migrations from Africa, so close geographically, left only a modest genetic imprint compared to the cultural impact they had. So, how has Spain managed to maintain this balance of diversity and uniqueness? To answer that, we need to travel back in time, thousands of years, where the story of Spanish DNA truly begins. Let's begin with the foundations of Spanish DNA, which stretch back to the Mesolithic period, about 12,000 years ago. During this time, the Iberian Peninsula was home to small bands of hunter-gatherers. These were the first humans to settle the land, and their genetic legacy forms the earliest layer of Spanish DNA. Evidence from archaeological sites like Atapuerca has revealed fossils that connect these ancient hunter-gatherers directly to modern Spaniards. Then, around 9,000 years ago, a dramatic shift occurred. Neolithic farmers began migrating from Anatolia, bringing with them a revolutionary way of life, agriculture. This wave of migration didn't just transform the land, it left a lasting genetic mark. These early European farmers mixed with the indigenous hunter-gatherers, creating a new genetic profile. Traits such as darker hair and eyes, common in Spaniards today, are partly rooted in this ancient fusion. What's fascinating is how this genetic blend set the stage for the Iberian Peninsula to become a cradle of innovation and culture. But this was just the beginning. The real transformation came thousands of years later when a new group of people arrived, bringing with them a genetic revolution that reshaped Spain forever. Around 4,000 years ago, the Iberian Peninsula witnessed one of the most dramatic genetic shifts in its history. A group of people from the vast steppes of modern-day Russia and Ukraine migrated across Europe, eventually reaching Spain. These steppe people didn't just bring their advanced skills in metallurgy and horse domestication. They brought a genetic legacy that would completely reshape Iberian DNA. Here's the astonishing part. Within just a few generations, nearly all the male DNA in the Iberian Peninsula was replaced. The Y chromosome haplogroup R1b, which originated with these steppe people, became dominant, making up around 70% of the genetic makeup in Spain today. In regions like the Basque Country, this haplogroup is even more prevalent, reaching up to 90%. What's remarkable is that despite this massive genetic turnover, there's no evidence of widespread violence or conflict in the archaeological record. Instead, researchers believe the steppe men might have achieved dominance through social or reproductive advantages, gradually blending into existing Iberian cultures. This migration also introduced traits that are still visible today, like lighter skin tones and specific genetic markers related to height. But while the steppe people had a profound influence on Spain's genetic structure, they didn't erase the earlier layers of Iberian identity. Instead, they became another chapter in the ever-evolving story of Spanish DNA, a story that continued to unfold with the arrival of yet another wave of settlers, the Celts. As the Bronze Age came to a close, another group of people began making their way into the Iberian Peninsula, the Celts. These migrations, which occurred in two major waves during the 9th and 7th centuries BCE, brought a new layer of both cultural and genetic influence to the region. Unlike the steppe migrations, the Celts didn't completely replace the existing populations. Instead, they merged with the indigenous Iberians, forming a unique hybrid identity known as the Celtiberians. The Celts settled mostly in northern and central Spain, particularly around the Douro and Ebro River valleys. They brought with them advanced metalworking skills and unique cultural practices, some of which are still echoed in Spain's rural traditions today. Genetically, the Celtiberians shared much in common with the ancient populations of Atlantic Europe, including regions like Ireland, Wales, and Brittany. One of the clearest markers of this connection is the R1b haplogroup, which dominates the male lineage in Spain and is also common in these Atlantic regions. This genetic similarity highlights Spain's strong ties to its northern neighbors, emphasizing how Iberia has always been a key part of the broader Atlantic world. But what makes this period even more fascinating is how the Celtiberians laid the groundwork for Spain's cultural and genetic resilience. Their legacy isn't just in the DNA. It's in the way they adapted to waves of migrations while maintaining their distinct identity. However, this was just one chapter in Iberia's story. A new wave of influence would soon arrive, not from the north, but from the south, across the Strait of Gibraltar. In 711 AD, an event occurred that would leave a lasting mark on Spain's history, culture, and, to some extent, its DNA. A group of North African Berbers, led by Arab commanders, crossed the Strait of Gibraltar and began the Islamic conquest of the Iberian Peninsula. Over the next 8 centuries, much of Spain became part of Al-Andalus, a flourishing society where Islamic, Christian, and Jewish cultures thrived together. From a genetic perspective, the influence of North Africa is undeniable but far more nuanced than many assume. Genetic studies show that around 10% of modern Spanish DNA can be traced back to North Africa, with the highest concentrations found in Andalusia and western Spain. This percentage is similar to what is seen in regions like southern Italy or northern France, indicating a localized rather than overwhelming genetic impact. One reason for this limited influence is that the Muslim population during the conquest was relatively small compared to the existing Iberian population. Additionally, following the Reconquista, a centuries-long effort by Christian kingdoms to reclaim the peninsula, many Muslims, known as Moriscos, were expelled or assimilated into Spanish society. This largely erased much of their direct genetic contribution, especially in regions like Granada. What's particularly fascinating is the regional variation. In areas like Salamanca, studies suggest a surprising concentration of descendants from Moriscos, likely due to forced relocations during the 16th century. On the other hand, in the Basque Country, there's almost no trace of North African DNA, highlighting how Spain's genetic makeup varies dramatically from region to region. While the genetic footprint of the Islamic period is relatively small, its cultural impact was monumental. Architecture, language, agriculture, and even science in Spain owe much to this era. This blend of cultural richness and genetic diversity is what makes Spain's DNA such an intricate puzzle, one that continued to evolve as Spain reclaimed its identity during the Reconquista. But the story doesn't end there. Spain's DNA was also shaped by its internal diversity, with regional identities that remain distinct even today. Let's explore how this regional variation adds yet another layer to the uniqueness of Spanish genetics. One of the most fascinating aspects of Spanish DNA is how much it varies between regions while still maintaining a shared genetic core. This diversity reflects Spain's unique history of migrations, conquests, and repopulations, each leaving a distinct imprint on different parts of the peninsula. Genetic studies reveal that the east-west axis in Spain shows the most significant differentiation, with populations in Galicia and Andalusia displaying notable differences from those in Catalonia and Valencia. In contrast, the north-south axis shows remarkable similarity, likely due to the Reconquista, when Christian kingdoms in the north repopulated southern regions with northern settlers. Let's start with Galicia, in the northwest corner of Spain. This region is heavily influenced by Atlantic Europe, sharing strong genetic ties with Ireland, Wales, and Brittany. Despite its distance from North Africa, Galicia has a surprising amount of North African DNA, around 11%, a legacy of the Islamic period and later migrations of Moriscos after their expulsion from other parts of Spain. Andalusia, in the south, stands as a genetic melting pot. Here, European and North African ancestry blend most prominently, a testament to the region's long history under Islamic rule. The eastern areas, like Granada, reflect the cultural richness of Al-Andalus, while the western parts, closer to Portugal, exhibit stronger North African influences. Moving to Catalonia and Valencia, these regions have a more Mediterranean profile, with less North African ancestry but a notable mix of European influences. Catalonia's genetics are also shaped by its proximity to France, with shared haplogroups linking it closely to southern French populations. Then there's the Basque Country, a region that truly stands apart. Basques are one of the most genetically distinct groups in Europe, having remained isolated since the Iron Age. Unlike other parts of Spain, Basque DNA shows almost no trace of North African influence, and their genetic profile is dominated by the R1b haplogroup, which connects them to the steppe migrations thousands of years ago. Even Spain's islands reveal unique stories. In Ibiza, for example, the population has remained genetically isolated, descending primarily from Catalan settlers in the 13th century. Meanwhile, the Canary Islands, closer to Africa than Europe, exhibit a higher percentage of North African ancestry due to their geographic location and historical connections to African trade routes. These regional differences make Spain a genetic mosaic. Each area tells a story of adaptation, migration, and survival, yet they all share a deep historical connection to the rest of Western Europe. It's this blend of shared heritage and regional uniqueness that makes Spanish DNA unlike any other in the world. But to fully understand how Spain's genetic story fits into the larger picture, we need to zoom out and explore its deep ties to Western Europe and the migrations that link it to neighboring regions. Spain is not just a genetic outlier, it's a keystone in the story of European ancestry. For thousands of years, the Iberian Peninsula has acted as both a gateway and a bridge, connecting Europe to Africa and the Atlantic. Its influence stretches far beyond its borders, leaving a genetic legacy across Western Europe and even the British Isles. One of the most fascinating discoveries in genetic research involves a group of Iberian fishermen who, around 6,000 years ago, sailed across the Atlantic to the British Isles. Studies show that the DNA of these early Iberian settlers is almost identical to the genetic makeup of modern populations in Ireland and Wales. In fact, the most common genetic fingerprint in the British Isles today, haplogroup R1b, can be traced directly back to these ancient Iberian pioneers. But Spain's role as a genetic contributor didn't stop there. During the Ice Age, populations in northern Europe were forced southward into refuges like the Iberian Peninsula. As the ice retreated, these populations expanded back into Europe, carrying Iberian genetic markers with them. This wave of migration helped shape the genetic profile of much of Western Europe, connecting regions like France, Brittany, and even parts of Scandinavia to their Iberian roots. Even in modern times, Spain's unique DNA reflects its deep ties to Western Europe. The genetic similarity between Spaniards and the populations of France, Ireland, and Portugal is remarkable. Regions like Navarre and the Basque Country, with their high frequencies of the R1b haplogroup, highlight this Atlantic connection even more strongly. However, what makes Spain so intriguing is not just its connection to Europe but also its role as a genetic crossroads. While its DNA is heavily Western European, it carries subtle traces of the Mediterranean and North African worlds, making it one of the most complex genetic profiles on the continent. This deep connection to both Europe and neighboring regions cements Spain's position as a key player in understanding human migration and adaptation. But to truly appreciate the uniqueness of Spanish DNA, we need to consider one final layer: how history has shaped not just its genes, but the cultural identity tied to them. Spain's DNA is like a living archive, a collection of stories etched into the genetic code of its people. But what makes it truly unique compared to its neighbors? It's the way this DNA reflects both deep continuity and remarkable adaptability across thousands of years. Unlike other Mediterranean countries, Spain's genetic makeup is far more aligned with Western Europe than the Eastern Mediterranean or North Africa. This is largely due to the dominance of the R1b haplogroup, which links Spaniards closely to populations in Ireland, Wales, and Brittany. Yet, it's not just the similarities that make Spanish DNA stand out, it's the diversity within its borders. From the isolated Basques, whose genetic profile has barely changed since the Iron Age, to the southern regions of Andalusia, where traces of North African ancestry remain from the Islamic period, each part of Spain tells a slightly different story. Even regions like Galicia and the Canary Islands show how history has uniquely shaped local populations, from Celtic migrations to trade routes with Africa. Another fascinating aspect of Spanish DNA is its homogeneity compared to countries like Italy or the Balkans, where centuries of invasions created more fragmented genetic patterns. In Spain, historical migrations, whether from the steppe, the Celts, or North Africa, blended into the local population rather than overwhelming it. This balance has resulted in a genetic profile that feels both unified and deeply layered. Even today, Spanish DNA continues to intrigue researchers. Recent studies show that while Spain shares genetic connections with its European neighbors, its unique history of migrations, cultural resilience, and regional diversity makes it unlike any other country on the continent. This DNA is not just a scientific curiosity. It's a testament to the endurance and adaptability of the people who've called this land home for tens of thousands of years. As we've seen, Spain's genetic journey is deeply tied to its past. But the final layer to uncover is how modern research continues to reveal surprising insights, challenging everything we thought we knew about the history of this extraordinary land. Modern genetic research has revolutionized how we understand Spanish DNA, revealing insights that were previously hidden beneath layers of history. Advanced techniques, like autosomal DNA analysis and mitochondrial DNA studies, have provided a much clearer picture of how Spain's genetic identity evolved. And some of the findings are truly surprising. For instance, a study of over 2,000 individuals revealed that Spanish populations have stronger genetic ties to Western Europe than previously thought. Yet, regional variations tell their own story. In Ibiza, researchers discovered that the modern population is almost entirely descended from a small group of Catalan settlers from the 13th century. There's no trace of earlier invaders, like the Carthaginians or Romans, even though they dominated the island for centuries. This pattern of isolated genetic pools mirrors what is seen in places like Sardinia or Iceland. Another fascinating discovery involves Galicia. While this region has long been associated with its Celtic heritage, modern research shows a genetic footprint that ties it not only to Ireland and Wales but also to North Africa. This unexpected North African influence likely stems from migrations during the Islamic period and later resettlements of Moriscos. And let's not forget the Basques, who continue to puzzle researchers. Despite their clear steppe ancestry, their genetic profile is remarkably distinct from the rest of Europe. Studies show that their isolation since the Iron Age has preserved their unique identity, while their language, unrelated to any other in Europe, suggests a cultural resilience that matches their genetic continuity. One of the most unexpected findings comes from studies on the genetic impacts of the Islamic conquest. While the cultural influence of Al-Andalus is evident in architecture, language, and agriculture, the genetic contribution is smaller than anticipated, just around 10% in most regions. This highlights how migrations can shape societies culturally without necessarily leaving a significant genetic imprint. Finally, modern research has confirmed that Spain's DNA reflects not only ancient migrations but also the movement of people during the Middle Ages. Events like the Reconquista and the expulsion of Jews and Moriscos left a genetic imprint that remains visible today. For example, regions like Salamanca have a higher percentage of North African ancestry than Granada, a result of forced relocation centuries ago. These findings remind us that DNA is a constantly evolving story. Spain's genetic profile is not static, it's a dynamic record of migrations, adaptations, and survival. And as science continues to advance, there's no doubt we'll uncover even more layers to the fascinating history written in the genes of the Spanish people. But to truly appreciate what we've learned, let's bring everything together and reflect on why Spain's DNA stands as a unique testament to the resilience and complexity of human history. As we've journeyed through the story of Spanish DNA, one thing becomes abundantly clear. It's not just about genetics, it's about history, culture, and resilience. Spanish DNA is a living timeline, stretching back tens of thousands of years, connecting the Iberian Peninsula to ancient hunter-gatherers, Neolithic farmers, and steppe nomads who reshaped Europe. What makes Spain's DNA so unique is its perfect balance between diversity and continuity. It tells the story of a land shaped by countless migrations, Celtic tribes, North African settlers, Roman colonists, and even medieval repopulations, all blending into a genetic mosaic that is distinctly Spanish. And yet, through it all, Spain has maintained a strong connection to its Western European roots, preserving a genetic legacy that aligns more with Ireland, Wales, and Brittany than with its Mediterranean neighbors. Each region in Spain adds its own chapter to this story, from the isolated Basques, whose DNA offers a glimpse into the past, to the melting pot of Andalusia, where Europe and Africa meet. The diversity within Spain itself is remarkable. Even regions like Galicia, Ibiza, and the Canary Islands reflect how history has shaped local identities in surprising ways. But beyond the scientific data, Spanish DNA carries a deeper lesson about humanity. It's a reminder of how interconnected we are, how migrations and exchanges have shaped not just Spain but the entire genetic landscape of Europe. It shows us that no population is pure or unchanging. Our DNA is a testament to survival, adaptation, and the blending of cultures over time. So, what makes Spanish DNA truly unique? It's not just the genetic markers or haplogroups. It's the story they tell, a story of resilience, connection, and transformation. And that's a story worth celebrating. Now, it's your turn. What do you find most fascinating about Spain's genetic story? Let us know in the comments below. And if you love uncovering the hidden stories of history and science, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the fascinating world of human genetics.